Welcome back, everybody. So I hope that you managed to meet someone new or make a connection with someone you haven't seen for a while. And we'll now move into our panel and introduce our guest speakers for today. So Ellie, if you could spotlight me, Luke, Louise and Samina, that would be fantastic. And we will introduce our speakers for today. So we're really pleased for this session to be joined by Dr. Samina Khan from Oxford University, Louise Banahene from Leeds University, and Luke Chapman from King's College London. This session idea actually came from a conversation I had with Samina a few weeks back now, where we were catching up after a very long time and after post-pandemic, and I was really intrigued and interested by some of the reflections that Samina was sharing around the impact of the pandemic on widening participation for disadvantaged pupils, but also what Oxford has been doing as a university in response. We're just missing Louise on the, oh, there we go, perfect, thanks Ellie. And so this was the idea for this panel, and wanted to hear from a couple of our other university members of the Fair Education Alliance on this topic. So welcome Louise and Samina and Luke, and we'll start us off with the first question, which is around what has the impact of COVID-19 been on widening participation and access from your experiences. So we'll go to Samina first.
Sorry about that. You'd think after a year of being on screen and Zoom and Teams, I would have got it by now. I was just saying, it's been an absolutely enormous impact in terms of university widening participation and access. I mean, the first thing is to say that my hat off to university recruitment and admissions team. They have been so agile, so quick to respond to what the pandemic has thrown at us. And if you look at it in terms of dedication, I think the whole of the university HE sector needs just a shout out. Being agile and also being well informed, it was a great opportunity within the university to use evidence-based research to think about how can we address what's happening in schools, in school sectors. Because when the first lockdown happened, schools were shut down, exams were cancelled, and it all happened in the same sentence. And we were all sent home. And so we had to find new ways of working effectively. And one thing that we suddenly came to light was, okay, we may not be able to meet people face to face, we may not be able to go into schools, but there's other different ways of doing that. And that's where we resorted to using technology very creatively in outreach. We also knew there was a lot of homeschooling going on. There were teachers teaching from remote classrooms. And that was an opportunity for us to use materials for different age groups. It was also an opportunity to work with a younger age group as well. So the way we did outreach completely transformed, and everything that we did face to face just turned into digital outreach. And then on top of that, not just outreach had to change, but the way we did admissions changed. The biggest change that we did was all our Oxford interviews, and we interview everybody we make an offer to, had to go online. Even during the first, and we did a bit of background, even during the First and Second World War, we did face-to-face interviews. So it took this pandemic actually to force us to think differently. And we successfully delivered something like 20,000 interviews online. So I'll pause there and let others contribute.
Yeah, thanks so much, Samina. I love that. Shows the size of the situation, isn't it? When even the First and Second World War didn't force us to change in the way that this global pandemic has. So Luke, over to you to add to that question.
Yeah, cheers, Sam. So I completely, firstly, echo everything that Samina said. It's definitely the experiences that we felt at King's. I suppose it's interesting. We were talking about this in our breakout room, that I suppose those of us, you know, at the coalface, so to speak, are aware of some of the deep inequalities that exist in our society. But what COVID has definitely done is shone a light on those inequalities, and those inequalities and gaps have been exacerbated even further. And so in terms of how we address that in widening participation, I think the challenge is stark. I think that certainly the implications of schools is something that we've been considering at King's, how stretched resources, how little time teachers have got to facilitate our sessions, and these sorts of things made a significant difference. I think our partnership with charities was really important during this period, particularly our partnership with folks like the Brilliant Club, Into University, Citizens UK, in order to actually right there and then charity staff being incredibly important to making sure there's some consistency in education for our young people. And it was through Citizens UK and our partnership with them at King's that we really got an idea of the sorts of challenges that our local communities were facing, the sort of, you know, the lack of, well, I suppose the digital poverty, the lack of internet access, the lack of devices, the lack of space and quiet space at home to study, and those sorts of things impacted our decision making in terms of our programming, in terms of where we put our resource. And I suppose that naturally there was an inclination just to rush in and start doing as much as we can, but we tried to take stock of where our resource would best be used, and sometimes that was continuing our programs and just moving them online. Sometimes that was pausing programs in order to do other things with our resource. Sometimes it was changing our focus from young people to parents and thinking about the well-being of our parents and carers, forming groups for support and particularly for social workers as well, who really, you know, saw it all during those first few months of the pandemic, and what we could do as a WP team to support them. But yeah, there's just a few thoughts.
Thank you. And Louise?
Thanks. Yes, I would echo everything that Samina and Luke said in terms of the importance of pivoting to online, the link with charities, the need to be very agile, and on the face of it, it was successful in that we recruited more students from disadvantaged backgrounds than we had ever done. We engaged with more young people, prospective students, other key influences than we had ever reached before, and we have a significant programme like King's College and Oxford have. But dig a bit deeper, and like Luke and Samina were saying, I think you can see that it really did shine a light on the inequalities. So we were working with schools who reported that there was as few as 20% of their school cohort who were actually engaging with online learning. There were some schools who in the first lockdown really struggled to get anything off the ground. They just had too much going on. So whilst we had that increase in engagement, we could see that in some schools, some areas, they really struggled. So as Luke said, that focus on sustained engagement, the relationship with existing charities, so that it felt very much like a partnership, was absolutely crucial. I think the other element for us as well was we were really conscious of the fact that although you can pivot to online and it is very successful, we really wanted to consciously think about some of that, some of the important messages that are conveyed often in those quite informal conversations, which is about the way in which you feel like you belong at the university because you've come on campus, you've met some students or some staff who make you feel like this is where I want to be, or you have a conversation with a student and you start to understand what that course might be like or what you might need to think about when you get here. So we did a lot of work to ensure that that wasn't lost and that there was that space for informal conversations, and that we really reframed the transition to university as well, so that we were thinking and designing our programme with those students in mind, and that those students who don't necessarily have brothers or sisters who are at university who would know all of that sort of hidden curriculum, all of those hidden nuggets of knowledge that you do know if you've been on campus numerous times or your parents have been to university. So I think that was the other area that we really focused on.
And just to pick up, so Louise, you mentioned that on the surface, you've been able to recruit as many or more disadvantaged young people in your cohorts than ever before. And is that something that's been common for Luke and Samina as well, that the kind of admissions have held up, but it's been some of the hidden effects? So I don't know if one of you wants to say some more about that.
So we had the best year in terms of access at Oxford, despite the cancelling of exams and everything else. I think when we realised what the off-call algorithm might do and the negative impact it might have on students from schools where there was, historically not great academic performance at Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 5, we knew that our offer holders would be disadvantaged by that, despite them being very bright, academically very bright. Their school's historic data would not help them. So we lobbied Ofqual and whoever else would listen, but the algorithm didn't change. So we took it upon ourselves to find out about, as much as we could, about our offer holders we thought would be negatively impacted. And this is where individual level contextual data was so important. And we got in touch with the schools to say, is there anything else we should know about the impact of the pandemic on teaching and learning for your offer holder? Can you tell us more? So that just helped us get ready for when on A-level results day, the first A-level results day, when so many students were so disappointed, we had a policy in place to say, actually look at all the other information we've got on them, their interview scores, their admissions test score, any contested information, and can we apply some leeway here? And that's what we did. We took an awful lot of students who, through the algorithm, didn't meet the conditions of our offer. And we said, we feel you will be, successful on course, we'll take you. And then when the algorithm, when the government did its U-turn and CAGs came in, teachers confirmed what we had thought. And we took some more students in. So we were very flexible, but we were lucky we had a lot of information on our students. And this is where it points back to, DFE really does need to give us individual level data on disadvantage, eligibility for free school meals, in care, child in need, on the UCAS form, so that, we can have a consistent approach across all universities to identify disadvantaged students from different disadvantaged backgrounds. So we did things like that. And the other thing I think Louise has already mentioned is then helping them transition from school to university. And this is where our bridging programs have really been worth every penny, because we've had online materials available for them. We've had digital online residentials to help them go from school and home to a university. And that's even more important with the next generation, because they haven't been to open days. The ones in last admissions round had been to open days. This lot haven't, and Luke and Louise have already said, they just can't imagine themselves in a place that they haven't been to. So there's much more we have to do to help support them.
Yeah, and just to, for those on the call who might be newer members of the Fair Education Alliance, we actually had a big piece of work on contextualised admissions data a few years ago, which a few of us on the call were involved in producing, and you can find that on our website. And we did a lot of influencing with the Office for Students and others on trying to make that a reality. So I think that's an extra case for change, and I think we can bring that back out of the woodwork for sure, and remind everybody of the importance of that. The other point I wanted to pick up on that's been touched on is obviously a lot of the organisations on the call and who'll be listening to this podcast are charities who across the Fair Education Alliance who work, and you mentioned that working with those existing relationships and possibly new relationships through this time has been really helpful. I'd love to hear more about that, and in particular the adaptation that you've all talked about. Like, how has I guess the charities would have previously had in-person delivery of their programs and mentors that are visits and things like that. How have those relationships helped, and how have they kind of grown and adapted over the last year to help you be where you all are? Maybe Luke first.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Em. I think it's a really important question. So they've been incredibly important. I think we've always had quite a collaborative approach in our team in terms of our partnerships with charities. But it's really charity. I think I used the phrase at the coalface last time, and that's definitely right. Like charities, the experience of practitioners working in charities was so useful for us at that time. Like I'm talking, you know, March, April, May initially, but then throughout the whole pandemic, and charities have been enormously stretched, you know, particularly thinking some of our local charities. King sponsors a centre just up the road to me in Kennington for Inter-University, but likewise like CHIPS in Lambeth, Citizens UK, Brilliant Club, as I mentioned before, just a few there, whose work has been absolutely invaluable during the pandemic, giving us a real good insight into the lived experiences of our communities, as I said before, but equally using their and harnessing their existing relationships with whoever they're serving, where at a time when those sorts of connections are really important as a support to families. And we made some decisions in terms of where we were investing our resource as well. Like we gave more to our charitable partners last year than what we've done in previous years, and that's in recognition, you know, due to the scale of the problem. And so yeah, for us, they're one of the most important parts of our work. Oh, so I will just say as well, I mentioned Citizens before, Citizens UK, and so King's has got a whole university partnership with Citizens UK, and our work with Citizens has been really useful in terms of a listening campaign for Lambeth, to really give us a good understanding of the sort of lived experiences of our local communities. But that's also gone beyond that, and now we have an opportunity to work with Lambeth Council on developing a new social mobility strategy, which has all come about due to this working with charities, which I think just like is testament to how important like that partnership with charities is and continues to be.
Thank you. And Louise, we're coming to you now. So in terms of what University of Leeds has been doing, you mentioned specifically some recreation of spaces for some of those informal conversations that would have happened in person. Would love to hear a bit more about those practical things you've been doing as a university over the last year. And while Louise is speaking as well, really welcome if there's any questions from attendees that you'd like me to put to our panelists, please add those in the chat as well. So over to you, Louise.
Yeah, so when we were developing our online outreach, whether it was one-off sessions or summer schools, as with the face-to-face engagement, there was a very strong focus on sustained engagement. And we recognised how important it has always been to be able to involve our students and staff. So we made sure that we maintained that, and that there was a continuation of informal spaces. Through our contextual admissions programme, we know how impactful it is that students have the opportunity to be able to undertake a piece of work which is marked or assessed or reviewed by an academic member of staff. So we couldn't quite replicate that on that scale, but we did provide students with the opportunity to engage with students, staff, so that it built their confidence. They could feel that they were going to be interacting with people who they felt that they could connect with. There was a way of maintaining that relationship. And I think linking to what Luke was saying, where we work with charities, maintaining that relationship where we recruit students on their behalf to help deliver that. So, you know, for example, I think that one of the great benefits one of the good outcomes, of what's happened is the light that has been shone on the need for tutoring and the gaps in inequality, sometimes at the lower end. So being able to support that and be able to provide, still be able to provide students who can help with that tutoring, really help to maintain that and maintain, I suppose, that relationship as well as the tutoring side of things. But we did continue that through then to transition, so that it didn't just stop when you got your offer or your acceptance from the university. It continued into welcome and induction and transition, so that there was that I suppose that seamless transition into university.
So one of the, I think, opportunities there you've touched upon, Louise, is an opportunity that's there for educational inequality at large, as well as widening participation, which is almost, with things getting so bad, it's exposed some of the issues that were already there, and made it unavoidable for society to do something about it. So I think that's one of the reasons for the national tuition programme, for example. There's this opportunity with quote unquote recovery for us to influence what needs to happen right through education to support disadvantaged young people with those inequalities that were already there, but they've been kind of worsened and made more visible by COVID. So that's definitely a big opportunity. You've also mentioned that all of you say that the access has stayed level last year. I'm interested in, so I guess two questions: other opportunities that you see out of what's happened, and also your expectations on whether there will be a lag effect of some of these issues in access in maybe this year or the following year. So yeah, so maybe over to Samina for that one.
I think the lag effect is an interesting one, Sam, and it's difficult to predict what's going to happen. All I know is that we feel the impact of COVID is going to be with us for a few years to come. And we're particularly concerned about the current year 12s, because they're the ones who had their GCSEs awarded through CAGS. So they haven't sat any sort of formal examination since their key stage 2 SATs. So, you know, there is this generation coming through that all they've seen is COVID and the impact of that for a few years. So I think we need to encourage government to look deeply at the learning loss impact and what it is that it can do within schools to start to level that playing field. Because it'd be great if that leveling of the playing field could happen earlier, and it doesn't all happen when the students are applying to university. What about the ones that don't get to university? Who's going to be leveling for them? Of course, we want to play our part, but I think there is something that, you know, we need to work together on this. So I think everything that we've put in place, hopefully, you know, we'll also have the opportunity to evaluate it and to look at what has made a difference. I think the things that have made a difference are just switching to digital outreach, and some of the comments Louise and Luke have made about how we are assessing and going back to how we have created suddenly out of thin air digital programs, and what are the key components that are really valuable of those components. I really like the things that Louise was talking about, creating space for that informal chat so that people aren't just sitting there soaking in subject academic knowledge, but they're also getting to talk about university life with our student ambassadors and things like that. That socializing is so important as part of our digital programs. And I think the other thing is just going back, sorry, it's a drum I keep beating, about more quality individual level data to help us to understand contextual use of contextual admissions. And then I think the other thing is just keeping on track in terms of monitoring of the students. Once they're offer holders, what more can we do to support them? What more can we do to boost their confidence so they don't drop out? They do come, and they come with, you know, all the information they possibly need to transition to the first term of the academic year, which is where it's so difficult to make friends. How do you make friends if you're still online? And you know, the first term might be a blended approach. I think we've got to think creatively about freshers' fairs, student societies, and all those things. I think it's too early to say if the students that we've taken, whether the impact of COVID will impact on retention and attainment, but it's something that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat actually from Kim Isroff. Kim, I don't know what organisation you're from, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm not really from an organisation. I'm just thinking of setting one up, so there's no detail to go into.
Okay, well, hi Kim. Maybe you're applying for the Innovation Award, so welcome. So Kim's asked, has the pandemic impacted on dropout completion rates of disadvantaged students in HE? So I think relates to where Samina was going around, perhaps yet to see, but Louise, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or whether there's an expectation that it will.
Our completion rate, or our dropout rates, if we're defining it in terms of continuation, have improved for disadvantaged students and non-disadvantaged students, and we think there might be two reasons for that. The first one is we think that whilst there are challenges in delivering online learning, there is something about the increased flexibility to be able to study online, to have that flexibility of when you're doing it, to not have to commute if you're commuting. We saw that there was increased confidence in some of those small group sessions for some students when it was online. It felt like a safer space. We focused a lot on sense of belonging and about developing those networks, and our evidence shows that that has contributed to that. So yeah, that's some of the factors. I think though it does link to what Samina says, and that was saying about we'll see the impact of the pandemic for years to come, because whether that will be maintained is another matter. We talked about all the effects on attainment, but I think also around confidence and about your feeling that you deserve to be there. I think there's something about the next set of students coming in when they haven't had really formal exams and they haven't really had a great deal of teaching in schools and colleges. Where's their benchmark about whether they are best in class? Or, I mean, we can say, well, you are great because we've taken you, but I think students need that validation from more than one set of stakeholders, and I think that it's something that we will all need to do as a sector to continue to engage with students to address some of those risks that are probably heading down the line to us.
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of observation that it seems that there's been either things have got a bit better or stayed the same in this year, but it's that kind of unknown of where that lag impact that we've alluded to, of the impact on those kind of year 11, year 12 students as they then move into university. And I think it really reminds me of the reason why we've always felt it's really important for Impact Goal 5 and widening participation to be part of that wider Fair Education Alliance conversation, because seen in isolation as a problem, it's quite difficult to address access to university without seeing it in that wider context of educational inequality at large that starts, as we know, right from the early years, and all of the root causes and solutions that all of our members are working on around developing the whole child skills and well-being alongside attainment, supporting teachers and leaders, and preparing young people for life after school. All those things need to happen as a prerequisite to start tackling widening participation. And in the same way that there's been this huge a kind of opportunity in some ways of shedding light on some of those issues and opportunity to change things, we're also expecting that it's sent us back a few steps in terms of exacerbating that inequality, and that might show itself in the HE system in the coming years. So I think really one to watch out on. So I'm going to ask a bit of a challenging question. So if we are to, I guess, assume that there could be a lag effect, and I haven't prepared the panelists for this one. So if we were to expect that lag effect, what would you suggest are the things that need to happen now to prevent that lag effect from hitting widening participation in 1, 2, 3 years time? And what can the FEA as an alliance do to make that happen? Anyone want to volunteer for that one? I won't put anyone on the spot.
I don't mind starting. I do think that one of the, I suppose one of the actions that we do, I think it's important that we take as a sector is, I suppose, the recognition of the different lived experiences of the groups of students within that category of disadvantage. I think that for some it's layer upon layer of inequality. If you go to a school that requires improvement and you don't have a space to study, and there's a whole layer, and I think understanding what that looks like, and therefore the support that's out there already, but also what might not be available. So I think the tutoring is a really good example of that, where it's fantastic. It's never going to be enough to reach all of those students who would benefit from it. So what else do we need to be doing in that space? How do we support those schools who are in a difficult space and frankly not really in a place that would be able to prepare for the next round of guidance that Ofqual have put out about how you set grades for students? So how are they going to be supported so that the same outcomes are going to happen for those groups of students as it would be for a student in a very disadvantaged area but in a school that's good or outstanding, for example?
Samina.
Just building on what Louise is saying, I think there's an opportunity to be more creative about end of school examinations as well. I think this is an opportunity not just to revert back to what we've done before COVID hit. What else can we do to assess students' ability, their skills, their potential in school? I think we should encourage government to look at that in more depth. I think we should look at ways in which our very exhausted teachers can be supported. And one of the things that I think that might help to accelerate learning, because I think we've got to talk about accelerated learning, the way accelerated learning is used in countries where there've been conflict or disaster. There are examples of accelerated learning that they use. You know, is there more that we can do in terms of setting up summer schools in schools so that, you know, knowledge, skills, confidence, mental health can be looked at holistically to help the students get back to where they, you know, to a level where they're comfortable and confident about themselves and their next steps. And I think there's a role for HE, because I think all of us have learned so much in terms of digital outreach, what schools want and how we've responded to that, to the various things that we've done, and the things that things that Luke and Louise have said about working in collaboration with the third sector, with charities. There's a lot there that we should be drawing on and evaluating as well, actually, for future years. Yeah,
I love that, Samina, and it's interesting. The Fair Education Alliance has had our priority around an education system that develops the whole child and not just focusing on attainment but skills and wellbeing pre-pandemic. I'm just going to put a link in the chat to the Rethinking assessment campaign, and we're getting behind this as well, to, as you say, think more creatively about, we've been stuck in this paradigm of exams have to be a certain way, and interestingly to hear it from you guys, because there's often the thing of like universities are blamed in a way that, oh, we have to have schools that give grades so that universities can select the students that they want to apply. And actually I think this has shown that that appetite from you, Samina, and I think at large it's a bit of a myth that we need it to be this way, with academic grades being the only way. And actually employers, universities, apprenticeships, colleges, they all want to see more than just attainment is of course important, absolutely, and that knowledge, but there's other things as well, and I think this is a moment. So I put in the chat, if people are interested, the Rethinking assessment campaign. There was a really interesting session earlier in the Impact Festival by Liz Robinson from Big Education, which is worth, if you're interested, watching the recording of that, which is on this topic. And Luke, did you want to come in on that as well?
Just two tiny points. So I completely agree, and I think it's great that we're focusing interventions on attainment. Wellbeing, I'm so glad you mentioned it, is so important, and it needs to be thought of holistically. And equally, I just think that if we think about the young people who we're really talking about here, who might have the furthest to go in terms of their attainment, we need to make sure that interventions are specialist and targeted, and that we don't risk exhaustion of these young people by keeping them in school for hours after than they need to be, and like significant extra time spent learning, and how we can best target our interventions. But I also just wanted to pull up on the point that Samina said, and just to kind of echo it, that the data points are so important when it comes to contextual admissions. I'm sure Louise agrees with this as well from Access to Leeds perspective. But I'm particularly concerned about the risk to predicted grades in the future, and they're such a use of what we know about our widening participation students is often they'll be over predicted, and I think there's a significant risk in new models for admissions that we lose those really important data points. Specifically thinking about, I think the student that Samina mentioned was that, when was the last formal assessment that some of these young people will have taken? Without predicted grades, it's so difficult for universities to get an accurate reading of the potential of that young person. So just as we won all the postcode indicators and all of their lived experience indicators in terms of any time spent in care, etc., the attainment indicator is just as important for universities, and more so, I'd say, now than before, due to COVID.
Which I think is an interesting one to square that circle, when there's a kind of desire to be more creative with assessment and consider attainment, well-being, skills, but at the same time there is still that need for that indicator as well. So I think a careful tension to manage there. So I want to give each of you the chance to kind of wrap up with a final, something you haven't said that you've really wanted to share, or a kind of summary thought to leave everybody with. So we'll go to, we'll do it in reverse order this time. So Louise, I think Louise first.
Two things, but I'll make them small. Just following on the assessment point, I think that certainly as universities, I think what we've all seen is terminal end of term or year assessments, just they aren't necessarily, there are more innovative ways to assess. So I think that's something that we can all learn as a sector. And then the other point that I just wanted to pick up was, I think that we have a risk to geographic mobility unless we address it. I think that we'll see students thinking that they want to stay closer to home because of the risks around moving further away. That we need to tackle that as a sector to be able to support that and maintain that geographic mobility that is so beneficial to many students, which links into the point about admissions, where sometimes decisions are made based on choices of locations more than other factors.
Wonderful, thank you. And Luke?
So I think two from me. The first is, I think Louise mentioned agile at the start of the session, which I completely agree with. I think universities are going to continue to be agile over the next few years, certainly, especially with the move to outcomes by the Office for Students, meaning that we've got a greater focus on seeing impact that we're making. And I think we need to be receptive to changes that will occur because of the pandemic. And the second thing is, I think we're yet to see the true impact of the pandemic, but I'm really excited by that Cosmo work that's taking place between Sutton Trust and UCL, which is going to track many students who I think they're going to be year 11 students to start off with, to really see the effects of the pandemic on our young people.
And Samina?
I think my two things are parents, role of parents and guardians in students' education. I think online school teaching has been a real eye-opener for lots of parents, and they've sat in and watched their children being part of this virtual class. And a lot of eyes have been opened as to what happens. So I think there's more maybe outreach from universities to do to work with parents and to widen our stakeholder groups, so teachers, students and parents as well. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was we talk a lot about students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I would like a discussion on what is advantage, because I think to really understand the gap, we have to understand the other end of the spectrum as well. And that may help us to better understand then the context in which some of the students from disadvantaged backgrounds are applying, because we take for granted almost the advantage side of the spectrum. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that means, and then we got a better comparator maybe. Thanks.
I absolutely love that, Samina. I think that's a fantastic point, and I think it's really a key point for the Fair Education Alliance to think about in general. Like, we focus so much on disadvantage, but we never stop to think, what does that mean about advantage? So love that. We have had one question in the chat while you were just all wrapping up, which we have time for, and if there's any other questions, please do add them in now before we finish. So as you all know, one of the FEA's priorities is about joining up that support from different destinations. So kind of university access to employability, access to apprenticeships, etc. And the question in the chat is around, you mentioned that there's been increase in communication and linking up between charities and schools and universities. Has there been any change in how joined up universities are with those kind of employers or apprenticeships or other destinations that young people might go to through the pandemic?
I think that's a really interesting one, Sam, and just reflecting on what we do, I think there's more that we need to do with employers. We don't really have employers as major stakeholders. They are stakeholders in terms of, I suppose, students on course in careers and destination, but I think I would like to have more conversations with employers, because one of the the things that is a constant barrier is course choice. How do I select the course that I want to do at university? And quite often it's limited to, I know what I can do with this if I do medicine, engineering, etc. But it'd be good to join up with employers to look at opening up this whole conversation about course choice, because humanities courses lead to so many different careers, and they're everywhere in all sorts of sectors.
Luke.
Yeah, I completely agree with Samina. I think it's an excellent question. Just a quick comment is that what I'm certainly increasingly finding in my role is that larger firms, like city-based firms, are really keen to diversify, and I think it's a mixture. I'm sure they have been for a long time, but the conversations seem to have increased over the last year or so. I'm sure that's because of COVID, but I also am sure it's because of the murder of George Floyd and the BLM movement, and wanting to make sure that everything's anti-racist and tackle any structural inequalities. And I think that those two things coupled have meant that we're in contact probably more than before with employers, opportunities for young people on our WP programs, but equally we've talked to them about funding, work experience places and those sorts of things. So I think that those conversations are increasing, but I think certainly kind of pipeline teams, diversity teams, EDI teams, and corporate social responsibility teams, those sorts of folks seem really invested in diversifying.
Louise,
I was going to say that we've benefited from our UniConnect in our region, being able to connect up the post-16 providers, employers, apprenticeship providers. So we have been able to, I think that's been beneficial when we moved online and being able to think about new opportunities to link up some of those via outreach, and in some ways address some of the logistical challenges to be able to put on collaborative events themed around professions or broad areas like engineering or the arts. So that's been beneficial, both thinking about opportunities at a regional level, but also at a national level to link in, as Luke and Samina were saying.
Yeah, that's I think those so do you call it, it's UniConnect, is that what it's called? UniConnect.
Yes,
Yeah.
so the collaborative funded partnerships.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that kind of brings us up to time. I can't see any other questions in the chat. Oh, we've got one more question in the chat. I do want to give time to it. We'll sneak it in. So thank you, Linda, for your question. What support can be given to parents in supporting their decision making with their children around university during this pandemic, which I think links quite nicely with, I think, Samina, you mentioned parental engagement. And yeah, I think it's a great question, because there's been more broadly in the FEA again a big opportunity around, with children learning from home, parents have actually become more involved, which is something we wanted pre-pandemic as well. So great question from Linda. We probably have time for one person to answer it who would like to raise their hand, and Luke got in there first. Over to you.
Sorry, I'll give it a go. So I think a few things. So number one is that there's certainly at King's, I'm sure at the university as well, there's been a significant increase in the number of parent webinars and parent sessions that take place to help keep them informed and support their young person with the decision making, and equally carers. I would also just give a quick shout out to King's runs a program called Parent Power, and there's also Empoderando Familia for a Spanish speaking version due to a high number of Spanish speaking folks in Lambeth, and also there's an Oldham version now where parents come together and support each other and build power through connections. And I think that those parental groups are really important. We've been text messaging our parents on our Key Stage 3 scheme throughout the pandemic with wellbeing tips and tips about where they can find further support. And the final thing to say is that I think that we haven't really touched on opportunity areas, but we've also been doing some working in an opportunity area with parents there, and again, using parents as support groups and sharing of knowledge among parents.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap us up there. Thank you so much to Luke, Louise and Samina for your time and a fascinating conversation. We're just going to pull up a quick poll for you all to fill out with your quick feedback on this session. And then if you can come off mute and give everybody a round of applause for their time today and insights. So hopefully everyone can see that poll. And you can just, there's a couple of questions, so scroll down, rating the session overall, speakers, and what you've got out of the session. I think it's absolutely fascinating, the interlinks with how widening participation fits in with educational inequality at large and the overlaps. So always such a pleasure to put a spotlight on this issue. So thank you very much. Got most of the votes in now. So yeah, if we come off mute, give a round of applause, and then we will leave you to your evenings. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's get outside and get some fresh air. See you later, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.